Sarah Mitchell clutched her worn leather portfolio as she stepped into the gleaming marble lobby of Blackstone Industries. The towering glass building stretched toward the clouds, making her feel impossibly small. At 26, she had already faced more rejection letters than most people saw in a lifetime. Her design degree from a community college meant nothing to the fancy firms downtown, and her savings account showed a terrifying number that started with a $, followed by 2 digits. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt like ascending to another world. Sarah had applied for a junior marketing position, but the email that came back surprised her. Instead of the usual rejection, it invited her for a personal meeting with the CEO himself. Marcus Blackstone was legendary in the business world, a man who had built his empire from nothing and now controlled half the commercial real estate in the city. When the elevator doors opened, Sarah found herself in a reception area that looked more like a palace than an office. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. The receptionist, a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a suit that probably cost more than Sarah's rent, barely looked up from her computer screen. "Sarah Mitchell to see Mr. Blackstone," Sarah announced, trying to keep her voice steady. The receptionist's eyes swept over Sarah's bargain store blazer and scuffed shoes with obvious disdain. "He's expecting you. Conference room 3 down the hall to your right." Sarah's heels clicked nervously against the polished floor as she made her way down the corridor. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the entire city spread out below like a miniature model. She had grown up in the poorest neighborhood down there, where dreams felt as distant as the stars. The conference room door was already open when she arrived. Marcus Blackstone stood with his back to her, gazing out at the city skyline. Even from behind, he commanded attention. His perfectly tailored navy suit hugged his broad shoulders, and his dark hair was styled with precision. When he turned around, Sarah felt her breath catch slightly. Marcus was younger than she had expected, probably in his mid-30s, with sharp green eyes that seemed to see everything at once. His jaw was strong and clean-shaven, and there was something about his presence that filled the entire room. He was undeniably handsome, but there was also something cold and calculating in his expression that made Sarah instinctively take a step back. "Miss Mitchell," he said, his voice deep and smooth like expensive whiskey, "please have a seat." Sarah settled into one of the leather chairs around the massive conference table, feeling like a child in an adult's chair. Marcus remained standing, which made her feel even smaller. "I've reviewed your application," he began, walking slowly around the table like a predator circling its prey. "Your qualifications are adequate. Your portfolio shows potential, though it lacks the sophistication we typically require." Sarah's heart sank. This was beginning to sound like every other rejection she had received. "However," Marcus continued, stopping directly in front of her, "I believe in taking calculated risks. I'm prepared to offer you something far beyond what you applied for." He leaned against the table, his intense gaze never leaving her face. "I need someone fresh, someone hungry, someone who understands what it means to want something desperately. You see, Miss Mitchell, I have a special project that requires a particular kind of dedication." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine at the way he emphasized the word dedication, but her desperate situation made her lean forward with interest. "I'm prepared to offer you a position as my personal assistant," Marcus said, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "The salary would be $200,000 a year, plus bonuses that could easily double that amount." Sarah's eyes widened in shock. The figure was more money than she had ever dreamed of making. It was enough to pay off her student loans, help her sick mother with medical bills, and finally escape the cramped apartment she shared with 3 roommates. "There's just one condition," Marcus continued, his voice dropping to an almost whisper: "complete obedience. When I give you an instruction, you follow it without question, without hesitation, and without complaint. In return, I will make you wealthy beyond your current imagination." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Sarah's mind raced with questions and concerns, but the memory of her empty refrigerator and her mother's worried phone calls about mounting medical bills pushed her doubts aside. "What kind of instructions?" she managed to ask, though her voice sounded small in the vast room. Marcus's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing illegal. Nothing that would truly harm you. Simply complete loyalty to me and my vision." You would handle my schedule, my personal affairs, my confidential business matters. You would be available when I need you, day or night. He moved closer, and Sarah caught a whiff of his expensive cologne mixed with something else. Power, perhaps, or danger. Think about it, Miss Mitchell. Your current situation versus a life of comfort and security. All you have to do is trust me and follow my lead. Can you do that? Sarah looked into his piercing green eyes and saw something that both thrilled and terrified her. This man was used to getting what he wanted, and right now he wanted her compliance. But the money he was offering represented everything she had ever hoped for. A chance to change her life completely. She began, then stopped, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the decision. You don't have to answer right now, Marcus said, straightening up and walking back to the window. Take the weekend to think about it. But remember, Miss Mitchell, opportunities like this don't come along very often, and they certainly don't wait for people who can't make decisions. As Sarah left the building that day, her mind was spinning with possibilities and fears in equal measure. She had no idea that accepting Marcus Blackstone's offer would set in motion a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. 3 days later, Sarah found herself sitting across from Marcus in his private office, signing a contract that felt more like selling her soul than starting a new job. The terms were exactly as he had promised: an enormous salary, incredible benefits, and one simple requirement: absolute obedience to his wishes. Her first week was surprisingly normal. Sarah organized his calendar, screened his calls, and managed his appointments with the efficiency of someone who had been doing the job for years. Marcus seemed pleased with her work, though he remained distant and professional. The other employees treated her with a mixture of curiosity and envy, whispering about how she had landed such a coveted position with no experience. The first real test came on a Friday evening. Sarah was packing up her desk when Marcus appeared beside her, silent as a shadow. Cancel your weekend plans, he said without preamble. We're flying to Chicago for a business meeting. Sarah looked up from her computer, confused. But sir, your calendar shows you're free this weekend. Marcus's eyes flashed with something cold and dangerous. Miss Mitchell, do you remember our agreement? The memory of their conversation came rushing back, along with the weight of the contract she had signed. Complete obedience, no questions asked. Of course, Mr. Blackstone, I'll need about an hour to pack. 30 minutes, he corrected. The jet leaves at 8. Sarah had never been on a private plane before, and under different circumstances she might have been excited. The leather seats were more comfortable than her bed at home, and the flight attendant served champagne in crystal glasses. But something about the trip felt wrong. Marcus was tense throughout the flight, making hushed phone calls and reviewing documents he kept carefully away from her view. When they landed in Chicago, a black limousine was waiting. Instead of heading to a hotel or office building, they drove to an upscale restaurant in a part of the city Sarah didn't recognize. Marcus led her to a private dining room where 2 men in expensive suits were already waiting. Gentlemen, my assistant, Sarah Mitchell, Marcus said by way of introduction. The men looked her over with expressions that made her skin crawl. Throughout the dinner, Sarah sat quietly while the 3 men discussed what sounded like business deals, but the conversation was filled with coded language and meaningful glances. She began to suspect that whatever they were planning wasn't entirely legal. Miss Mitchell, one of the men suddenly addressed her. You're very quiet. What do you think about our proposal? Sarah felt trapped. She had no idea what proposal he was referring to, and she could feel Marcus's eyes boring into her from across the table. I think Mr. Blackstone makes excellent decisions, she replied carefully, and I trust his judgment completely. The men laughed and Marcus looked pleased. You see, gentlemen, loyalty like this is rare. On the flight back to New York, Marcus was in an unusually good mood. You did well tonight, Sarah. Those men respect absolute loyalty, and they needed to see that you could be trusted. Trusted with what? Sarah asked before she could stop herself. Marcus turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. With keeping your mouth shut about things that aren't your concern. Over the following weeks, these mysterious trips became more frequent. Sometimes they would fly to other cities for strange meetings. Other times, Marcus would have her deliver sealed envelopes to addresses across the city, always with strict instructions not to look inside or ask questions. Sarah's bank account was growing rapidly, just as Marcus had promised. She was able to pay off her student loans, move into a beautiful apartment, and even hire a private nurse for her mother. But with each mysterious task, she felt herself sinking deeper into something she didn't understand. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday night. Marcus had asked her to stay late to help with some urgent paperwork. The office was empty except for the security guards, and the city lights twinkled far below through the rain-streaked windows. Sarah was filing documents when she accidentally knocked over a stack of papers from Marcus's desk. As she scrambled to pick them up, one particular document caught her eye. It was a financial record showing massive payments to offshore accounts with notes written in Marcus's handwriting about cleaning and laundering. Her blood ran cold as the implications hit her. Marcus wasn't just a successful businessman. He was involved in money laundering, possibly for criminal organizations. And she had been helping him, delivering those envelopes, attending those meetings, all while maintaining the perfect image of an innocent assistant. Find something interesting? Sarah spun around to find Marcus standing in the doorway, his expression dark and threatening. She had been so absorbed in the document that she hadn't heard him approach. "I was just picking up the papers I knocked over," she stammered, quickly gathering the documents. Marcus walked slowly toward her, each step deliberate and menacing. "Sarah, you've been an excellent employee. It would be such a shame if our arrangement had to end." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Sarah realized with growing horror that she wasn't just an employee anymore. She was an accomplice, and Marcus had made sure she was in too deep to simply walk away. "I haven't seen anything," she whispered, her hands shaking as she placed the papers back on his desk. "Good," Marcus said, stepping so close she could feel his breath on her face, because people who see too much sometimes have unfortunate accidents. "But as long as you continue to obey me without question, you'll continue to be very, very rich." As Sarah left the office that night, she realized she had made a terrible mistake. The money that had seemed like a blessing was actually a golden cage, and Marcus Blackstone was her captor. But what Marcus didn't know was that Sarah was not the helpless victim she appeared to be. Growing up poor had taught her to be resourceful, and she had been quietly documenting every strange task, every mysterious meeting, every suspicious transaction. She had no idea yet how she would use this information, but she was beginning to form a plan that would turn Marcus's own arrogance against him. Sarah began living a double life. During the day, she played the role of the perfect obedient assistant, following Marcus's every command without question. But during her evenings and weekends, she was carefully building a case against him that would eventually bring down his entire operation. She started small, using her access to his office to photograph documents when he was in meetings. Her phone became her most valuable tool, capturing images of financial records, correspondence with suspicious clients, and schedules for those mysterious trips. She also began keeping a detailed diary, recording every illegal task she was asked to perform, every shady meeting she attended, and every conversation that revealed more about Marcus's criminal activities. The breakthrough came when Marcus asked her to accompany him to a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. He told her to wait in the car while he went inside, but curiosity got the better of her. She slipped out of the limousine and crept around to a side window, where she could see Marcus meeting with several rough-looking men around tables covered with stacks of cash. Using her phone, she managed to record several minutes of their conversation, including Marcus giving explicit instructions about moving money through various shell companies to hide its criminal origins. She had struck gold, concrete evidence of his money laundering operation. But Sarah's careful spying didn't go unnoticed forever. Marcus had built his empire by being paranoid and observant, qualities that had kept him out of prison for years. He began to notice small things, documents that seemed slightly out of place. Sarah's phone pointed in unusual directions, her questions that seemed just a little too curious. The confrontation came on a cold February morning. Sarah arrived at the office to find Marcus waiting for her, sitting behind his desk with an expression that made her blood freeze. "Close the door, Sarah," he said quietly. She obeyed, though every instinct told her to run. Marcus gestured for her to sit across from him, but this time there was no pretense of politeness or professional courtesy. "I've been thinking about our relationship," Marcus began, his fingers steepled in front of him. "And I've come to realize that you've been taking liberties with your position here." Sarah's heart pounded, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I don't understand what you mean, Mr. Blackstone. Don't you?" Marcus pulled out her phone, which he must have taken from her purse. Interesting photos you have here. Very detailed records of things that should have remained private. The blood drained from Sarah's face as Marcus scrolled through her phone. Viewing all the evidence she had carefully collected over the past months, she had been so careful, or so she thought. You've been a very naughty girl, Sarah, Marcus continued, his voice dangerously soft. But I have to admit I'm impressed. You're much smarter than I gave you credit for. He stood up and walked around the desk, perching on the edge directly in front of her chair. The question now is what to do with you. I could simply fire you, but you know too much. I could arrange for you to have an accident, but that might draw unwanted attention. Sarah found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. What do you want? Marcus smiled, but it was the cold smile of a predator who had cornered its prey. I want you to forget everything you think you've learned. I want you to delete these photos, burn your little diary, and continue being my obedient assistant. In return, I'll double your salary and we'll pretend this conversation never happened. And if I refuse, then you'll discover that the people I do business with don't appreciate betrayal. Your mother's medical bills would suddenly become the least of your worries. The threat against her mother sent a surge of anger through Sarah that surprised her with its intensity. Marcus had made a critical error. He had just revealed exactly how much research he had done into her personal life, which meant he considered her a real threat. I need time to think, Sarah said carefully. You have until tomorrow morning, Marcus replied, tossing her phone back to her. But don't even think about running to the police. I have friends in very high places, and your word against mine won't get you very far. That night, Sarah sat in her apartment staring at her phone and the evidence she had collected. Marcus was right about one thing. She was just a nobody from the wrong side of town, while he was a powerful businessman with connections throughout the city. Going to the police seemed hopeless. But Sarah had learned something important from growing up poor. Sometimes the only way to fight power was with cunning. And Marcus had just made the mistake of underestimating her again. Instead of deleting the evidence as he had demanded, Sarah spent the night making copies of everything. She uploaded the photos to multiple cloud storage accounts, emailed copies to herself at different addresses, and even mailed physical copies to a trusted friend with instructions to open them if anything happened to her. More importantly, she began to realize that Marcus's arrogance was his greatest weakness. He was so confident in his power and control that he had become careless. He had threatened her in his own office, where she knew he kept recordings of all conversations for his own protection. If she could get him to repeat his threats and admissions on tape, she would have evidence even he couldn't explain away. The next morning, Sarah walked into Marcus's office with a small recording device hidden in her jacket pocket. She had practiced her performance all night, and now it was time to put it into action. I've made my decision, she announced, standing in front of his desk with her chin raised defiantly. Marcus looked up from his computer with an amused expression. Oh, and what decision is that? I'm not deleting anything, Sarah said firmly. And I'm not going to keep quiet about your illegal activities anymore. Marcus's expression darkened and he stood up slowly. I think you misunderstood the seriousness of our conversation yesterday. No, I understood perfectly, Sarah replied, making sure her voice was clear for the recording. You threatened to have me killed if I exposed your money laundering operation. You admitted to having corrupt connections in the police department, and you threatened to hurt my mother. Marcus's face went white as he realized what she was doing. He lunged toward her, but Sarah was already backing toward the door. You little bitch, he snarled. You have no idea what you've just done. Actually, I know exactly what I've done, Sarah said with a smile. I've just recorded you confirming everything I already had evidence for. And unlike my word against yours, recorded confessions tend to hold up very well in court. For the first time since she had met him, Marcus Blackstone looked truly afraid, and Sarah Mitchell, the poor girl from the wrong side of town, realized she finally had the power to bring down the man who had tried to make her his puppet. Sarah barely made it out of the building before Marcus's security team was alerted. Her hands shook as she hailed a taxi, constantly looking over her shoulder to see if she was being followed. She had anticipated this moment and already had a plan in place, but executing it under pressure was more terrifying than she had imagined. Her first stop was the main branch of the city's largest newspaper. Sarah had done her research and knew that investigative reporter Jennifer Walsh had a reputation for taking down corrupt businessmen. But when Sarah tried to explain her story, Walsh was skeptical. You realize Marcus Blackstone is one of the most respected businessmen in the city, Walsh said, reviewing the printed copies of documents Sarah had brought. These could be fabricated, and this recording, while interesting, could be taken out of context. Sarah felt her heart sinking. But the evidence is compelling, but it's not enough to publish a story that would destroy someone's reputation, Walsh interrupted. I need more corroboration, more sources, something that proves this isn't just a disgruntled employee trying to get revenge. Frustrated but not defeated, Sarah left the newspaper office and headed to her backup plan, the FBI. She had researched which agents specialized in financial crimes and requested a meeting with Agent David Rodriguez, who had a track record of prosecuting money laundering cases. Agent Rodriguez was more receptive than the reporter had been. He listened carefully as Sarah explained her situation and examined the evidence she had collected. The photos of cash-filled warehouses and recorded conversations about illegal financial transfers caught his attention immediately. This is good work, Rodriguez admitted, but it's going to take time to build a case. These kinds of operations usually involve multiple agencies and can take months or even years to prosecute properly. I don't have months, Sarah said desperately. Marcus knows what I have. He's not going to just sit around waiting for you to arrest him. Rodriguez nodded grimly. You're right to be concerned. Men like Blackstone don't usually let loose ends remain loose for very long. As if to prove his point, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. You have 24 hours to return what belongs to me, or your mother will pay the price. Sarah showed the message to Rodriguez, who immediately made several phone calls. Within an hour, Sarah's mother was moved to a safe house under federal protection, and Sarah herself was given a hotel room with around-the-clock security. But Marcus had more resources than either Sarah or the FBI had anticipated. The next morning, Sarah woke to find news reports claiming that she had embezzled money from Blackstone Industries. The reports included fabricated evidence of offshore accounts in her name and forged documents showing suspicious financial transactions. Marcus had turned the tables, painting himself as the victim of a scheming employee who had stolen from him, and was now trying to frame him to cover her own crimes. The story was picked up by multiple news outlets, and suddenly Sarah found herself branded as a criminal in the court of public opinion. This is exactly what I was afraid of, Jennifer Walsh told Sarah when she called the reporter. Blackstone has significant influence with the media. Without absolutely ironclad proof, any story I write will be seen as giving a platform to someone who might be lying. Even worse, Sarah discovered that Marcus had used his connections to freeze her bank accounts, claiming they contained stolen funds. The money that had seemed like a blessing just months ago was now being used as evidence against her. But Sarah had grown up fighting for everything she had, and she wasn't about to give up now. She realized that Marcus's counterattack actually revealed something important. He was scared enough to take significant risks to discredit her. That meant her evidence was more damaging than she had initially thought. Working with Agent Rodriguez, Sarah began to piece together a larger picture of Marcus's operation. The money laundering was just one part of a complex criminal enterprise that included bribery, tax evasion, and connections to organized crime. Her role as his assistant had given her access to information that could unravel the entire network. The breakthrough came when Sarah remembered the security system in Marcus's office. As part of his paranoia, Marcus recorded all conversations in his workspace, ostensibly for his own protection. But that also meant there were official recordings of their conversations, including his threats against her and admissions of criminal activity. The problem was getting access to those recordings. They were stored on a secure server in Marcus's building, protected by both digital security and physical guards. Sarah knew the layout of the office and the security protocols, but she couldn't simply walk back into the building. That's when Agent Rodriguez proposed a risky plan. If Sarah was willing to wear a wire and meet with Marcus, they might be able to get him to incriminate himself again, while also creating a distraction that would allow federal agents to access his security system. It's dangerous, Rodriguez warned her. Blackstone is desperate now, and desperate men do unpredictable things. If he realizes you're wearing a wire, there's no telling what he might do. Sarah thought about her mother in the safe house, about all the other people Marcus had probably hurt over the years, and about the choice between fighting back and spending the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. I'll do it, she said firmly, But I want guarantees that my mother will be safe no matter what happens to me. Rodriguez nodded. You have my word. The meeting was arranged for that evening at Marcus's penthouse apartment, under the pretense that Sarah wanted to negotiate a deal. She would return the evidence in exchange for her mother's safety, and a promise that Marcus would leave her alone. As Sarah prepared for what might be the most dangerous night of her life, she reflected on how much she had changed since that first day in Marcus's office. The scared, desperate young woman who had been willing to accept any job had transformed into someone who was prepared to risk everything to do what was right. Marcus had promised to make her rich if she obeyed him, but he had never anticipated that she would find something more valuable than money: the strength to fight back against injustice, even when the odds seemed impossible. The final confrontation was about to begin, and Sarah was ready to face whatever consequences came with standing up to one of the most powerful men in the city. Sarah's heart pounded as the elevator climbed to the top floor of Marcus's residential building. The wire hidden beneath her jacket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and every breath seemed too loud in the enclosed space. Agent Rodriguez's voice crackled softly through her earpiece, reminding her that backup was positioned throughout the building. Marcus's penthouse was even more impressive than his office, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. When the elevator doors opened directly into his living room, Sarah found Marcus waiting for her with 2 large men in expensive suits flanking him like bodyguards. "Sarah," Marcus said with a cold smile, "so good of you to come. I was beginning to think you had forgotten your manners." The apartment was dimly lit, with only a few strategic lights creating pools of illumination in the vast space. Sarah could see that Marcus had planned this meeting carefully, choosing an environment where he held all the advantages. "You know why I'm here," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I want my life back." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Your life? My dear girl, your life belongs to me now. You accepted my offer, you took my money, and you became part of my world. There's no going back from that." He gestured for her to sit on one of the leather couches, but Sarah remained standing. She needed to keep him talking, to get him to reveal enough information for the FBI recording to be useful. "I never agreed to help you launder money," Sarah said. "You tricked me into becoming part of your criminal operation." "Criminal?" Marcus feigned surprise. "I prefer to think of it as creative business practices. The money flows where it needs to flow, everyone gets paid, and the economy keeps moving. It's really quite elegant when you understand it properly." One of the bodyguards shifted slightly, and Sarah noticed the bulge of a weapon beneath his jacket. Agent Rodriguez had warned her that Marcus might be armed or have armed men with him, but seeing it in person made her mouth go dry with fear. "Those people you do business with," Sarah pressed, "they're not legitimate businessmen. I saw them at the warehouse, Marcus." "I know what kind of people they are." Marcus's expression darkened. "You saw far too much, which is why we're having this conversation. You see, Sarah, loyalty is everything in my business, and when someone proves they can't be loyal—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Sarah felt the weight of the wire beneath her jacket and tried to remember that federal agents were listening to every word. "Is that what happened to your last assistant?" Sarah asked, thinking of the mysterious woman who had supposedly quit without notice just before Sarah was hired. Did she see too much too? For the first time, Marcus looked genuinely surprised. "You've been asking questions about Rebecca? That's very interesting, and very dangerous. What happened to her, Marcus?" Marcus walked to the window and gazed out at the city lights below. "Rebecca made the same mistake you're making now. She thought she was smarter than me. She thought she could gather evidence and play detective." He turned back to face Sarah, and the look in his eyes made her blood run cold. "But you see, Sarah, I've been playing this game for a very long time. I know how to handle problems that threaten my business." "You killed her," Sarah whispered, the words barely audible. "I solved a problem," Marcus corrected. "Just like I'm going to solve the problem you've created." In her earpiece, Sarah could hear Agent Rodriguez coordinating with his team. The confession about Rebecca was exactly what they needed, but Sarah knew she was running out of time. Marcus was clearly building up to something, and the presence of armed bodyguards suggested it wouldn't end well for her. "The evidence I collected," Sarah said quickly, "it's already in the hands of the FBI. Killing me won't make it disappear." Marcus smiled, that cold, predatory smile again. "Oh, my naive little Sarah. Do you really think the FBI is beyond my reach? I have friends in very high places, friends who owe me favors, friends who understand that sometimes investigations need to be redirected. He pulled out his phone and showed her a text message from someone identified only as deputy director. The message was brief but chilling. Package will be delivered as discussed. Investigation terminated. You see, Marcus continued, your federal friends are about to discover that you've been working with foreign agents to steal classified information. Very serious charges, the kind that make someone disappear into a federal prison for the rest of their life. Sarah felt the world spinning around her. Even with all her careful planning, Marcus had anticipated her moves and prepared countermeasures. But then she remembered something Agent Rodriguez had told her during their briefing. Sometimes the best evidence comes from letting the criminal think they've won. You've thought of everything, Sarah said, letting her voice sound defeated. I should have known better than to try to outsmart Marcus Blackstone. Marcus's ego, always his greatest weakness, rose to the bait immediately. That's right. I built this empire by being smarter, more ruthless, and more prepared than everyone else. Did you really think some little girl from the slums could bring me down? He began pacing around the room, gesturing expansively as his arrogance took control. I own judges, prosecutors, police commissioners. I have senators on my payroll and federal agents who report to me. The money I move through this city funds campaigns and builds careers. Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. Marcus was detailing his entire corruption network, naming names and describing specific instances of bribery and influence peddling. In his certainty that he had already won, he was giving the FBI everything they needed to dismantle his entire operation. Even that warehouse you photographed, Marcus continued, warming to his subject. It's been cleaned out and the lease transferred to a shell company that doesn't exist. The men you saw there have already left the country. Every piece of evidence you think you have is worthless now. But Marcus had made one critical error in his arrogance. He had assumed that the only evidence against him was what Sarah had collected. He didn't know about the federal investigation that had been building independently, using Sarah's information as just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The sound of footsteps in the hallway outside made Marcus pause mid-sentence. His bodyguards immediately tensed, reaching for their weapons as the apartment's security system began chiming with incoming alerts. Expecting company? Sarah asked innocently. Marcus's face went white as he realized what was happening. The FBI had heard enough, and they were coming to arrest him whether Sarah's mission was complete or not. You clever little bitch, Marcus snarled, lunging toward Sarah as the sound of battering rams echoed through the penthouse. But Sarah was ready for him, and she had learned a few things about fighting, from growing up in the toughest neighborhood in the city. The penthouse erupted into chaos as federal agents poured through the doors from multiple entry points. Sarah dove behind the leather couch as Marcus's bodyguards drew their weapons, but they were immediately overwhelmed by the tactical team that had been positioned throughout the building. FBI, drop your weapons. Agent Rodriguez's voice boomed through the apartment as laser sights painted red dots across the chests of Marcus's men. Marcus himself tried to make a run for a hidden panic room behind a bookshelf, but Sarah had mentioned its location during her briefings with the FBI. Agents were already waiting for him when he reached for the concealed door handle. Marcus Blackstone, you're under arrest for money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy, and murder, Rodriguez announced as he personally placed the handcuffs on the man who had once seemed untouchable. As the dust settled and the bodyguards were led away in restraints, Sarah finally allowed herself to breathe. The wire had captured everything. Marcus's confessions about killing Rebecca, his detailed descriptions of his corruption network, and his admissions about the money laundering operation. But the real victory came in the weeks that followed. The investigation that Sarah had helped trigger expanded far beyond Marcus himself. The corrupt officials he had bragged about were arrested one by one. The network of shell companies and offshore accounts was systematically dismantled. Even the organized crime figures, who had been using Marcus to clean their money, found themselves facing federal charges. The warehouse that Marcus claimed had been cleaned out was actually under federal surveillance, and the FBI had been tracking the movement of money through his network for months before Sarah ever walked into his office. Her evidence had simply provided the final pieces needed to make arrests and secure convictions. Jennifer Walsh, the investigative reporter who had initially been skeptical of Sarah's story, ended up writing a series of articles that won her a Pulitzer Prize. The story of how a young woman from a poor neighborhood had taken down one of the city's most powerful criminals captured the public imagination and sparked reforms in how the financial industry was regulated. Marcus Blackstone was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The murder of Rebecca Martinez, his previous assistant, had been carefully covered up. But Sarah's recording had provided enough evidence for prosecutors to piece together what had happened. DNA evidence found in Marcus's penthouse confirmed that Rebecca had been killed there, and her body was eventually discovered in a construction site that Marcus's company had developed. The money that Marcus had paid, Sarah was eventually returned to the victims of his crimes as part of the restitution process. But Sarah discovered that she didn't need his blood money anymore. The FBI offered her a position as a financial crimes investigator, recognizing her natural talent for uncovering hidden connections and following money trails. Sarah's mother made a full recovery, thanks to the excellent medical care she received while under federal protection. When Sarah told her the whole story, her mother just smiled and said, "I always knew you were stronger than you thought you were." The penthouse apartment where Marcus had planned to have her killed was eventually sold at auction. Sarah bought it with her new FBI salary and turned it into a foundation headquarters and organization dedicated to helping other young people from disadvantaged backgrounds pursue education and career opportunities without having to compromise their integrity. 2 years after the arrest, Sarah stood in that same penthouse, now transformed into office space for her foundation. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the city spread out below, but it looked different now. Instead of a place where the powerful preyed on the weak, it seemed full of possibilities for people willing to work hard and do the right thing. Agent Rodriguez, who had become both a mentor and close friend, joined her at the window. "Any regrets?" he asked. Sarah thought about the scared young woman who had walked into Marcus Blackstone's office that first day, desperate enough to accept any offer, no matter how suspicious. That woman had been willing to trade her integrity for financial security, not understanding that some prices are too high to pay. "None," she said firmly. "Marcus promised to make me rich if I obeyed him, and in a way he kept his promise. I am rich, just not in the way he meant." She was rich in self-respect, rich in the knowledge that she had helped bring justice to victims who might never have gotten it otherwise, and rich in the understanding that real power doesn't come from having money or connections, but from having the courage to stand up for what's right. The foundation's first scholarship recipients were announced that day, 20 young people from backgrounds similar to Sarah's, who would get the chance to pursue their dreams without having to make the kinds of compromises she had almost made. Each of them would receive not just financial support, but mentorship and guidance to help them navigate challenges and stay true to their values. Marcus Blackstone had promised to make Sarah rich through obedience, but he had never seen this coming. In trying to corrupt her, he had actually created his own downfall. Sarah's refusal to stay bought, her determination to fight back against injustice, and her willingness to risk everything for what was right had not only destroyed his empire but created something positive from its ashes. As the sun set over the city, Sarah reflected on how completely her life had changed. She had started as a victim of circumstances, desperate and willing to accept whatever life offered her, but she had transformed herself into someone who helped shape her own destiny and the destinies of others. Marcus had been wrong about many things, but perhaps his greatest error was believing that everyone had a price. He had encountered someone whose integrity wasn't for sale, and that had cost him everything. Sarah Mitchell, the poor girl from the wrong side of town, had proven that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who has nothing left to lose except their principles, and refuses to lose those too.